Welcome to the Painter's Dialectic Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Green, a painter and art educator living in New York. And this month, our very first meeting of January 2026, I interviewed a hospital chaplain. And I just gotta say, massive trigger warning. We talk about some very, very heavy stuff in here related to death, violence, harsh aspects of sex. Massive trigger warning, but possibly one of my favorite episodes I've done so far. So please be advised. We discussed how he came to become a chaplain, how he perceives the Christian faith, and how he provides care in critical moments. Enjoy! And remember to support the IHS collection at the Weinberg Memorial Library at the University of Scranton. There's a link below where you can donate. That's all I ask from you. Like, subscribe. Thank you guys. Welcome everyone to this month. This is the first meeting of 2026. I'm happy you're all here, and today we're going to interview a hospital chaplain. We're going to talk about providing care in critical moments, how he came to Christianity and providing this care, and the state of American Christianity today. I would like to welcome, I guess I'm just calling you brother.
Yes, I'm very mysterious today.
Very
Um,
mysterious.
yeah,
Um,
so I'll just begin by saying, in case people are curious, because I do not have a social media presence by choice, and I value that. So I agreed to talk with Josh because we've befriended one another, and I like him good enough to uh, to do that. But we found a compromise in me appearing today, but still honoring not being on social media. So.
yeah, I chose you because you're a very interesting person. You're out doing really difficult service on a daily basis. I think you struggle with these theological ideas in a modern context. You've also studied the philosophy of science, which I believe you have a degree in, right?
I do have a degree in philosophy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, through a fortunate turn of events, I got to meet our chaplain here, and I love talking with him. And I think it's important right now in this current moment to talk about all these ideas. Brother or chaplain, why don't you tell us about how you entered into this line of work, being a hospital chaplain?
Yeah, I will give somewhat of an abbreviated story on that, I think. Um, Maybe I'll start with the end first. So I'm a chaplain resident at a trauma level one trauma hospital in a fairly rural area that has a wide area of service. We're the only trauma hospital nearby. So I deal with critical events, life-threatening emergencies. Um, So my typical shift, I usually work 12-hour shifts, similar to the nurses, because our hospital provides 24/7 care. I go to all codes, which are essentially cardiac or respiratory arrests. I go to all traumas that come in that are life-threatening or high-grade traumas. I serve pediatric patients all the way up to geriatric patients. I also serve at a psychiatric hospital, leading group sessions. My days are filled with death and suffering, horrible visual images, and pain, lots of pain, emotional and physical pain. I previously worked in a corporate career for 10 years that was very lucrative, but soul sucking. It was not in line with my personal values. At the time, I wasn't religious. I was raised as a Southern evangelical, and then I fell out of church and faith in my 20s when I began to study philosophy and particularly philosophy of science and language. Towards the end of my career, corporate career, I returned to church really returned to faith in seeking some sort of meaning and purpose that would draw me into a profession or vocation that allowed me to serve other people in need, and somewhat stumbled upon chaplaincy. I think I've told Josh I have a conversion story that I can tell if asked, but we'll just say I believe I was called by God into this service. I became a Franciscan. I'm not Catholic. I'm an Anglican Franciscan within the Anglican Communion. So in America, I'm part of the Episcopal Church, which is highly unusual since most Franciscans or vowed religious people are Catholic. Um, yeah, so that's what I'm doing. I'm currently serving as a chaplain and probably headed to do so in the future as well in a professional setting.
So it sounds like this is over a long period of time and it kind of led to an existential crisis or a lack of meaning.
Hmm.
What sort of ideas or philosophies or type of life did you find meaningless before you entered the faith?
I mean, in a nutshell, I think pursuit of wealth or power or status are fool's errands. Even though my position was very lucrative, in the end, what I really existed to do was make money for shareholders because that's really who profits. People with investment capital are the ones who really profit in our system. And I felt disingenuous doing that sort of work. Um, though I think our company was guided by ethical principles in treating one another as ethically as we could. I was involved in a DEI initiative that I'm certain has been shut down by now. Um, but that was important to me. But in the end, I just did not feel like I was um, making the world any better than the one I was currently living in. And that bothered me. That's just an innate, I think, desire to do so. Um, Also, I was quite the asshole, um, just in life in general. I was an unhappy person. Uh, I did not like myself, and I was uh, not a pleasant person to other people. I was highly critical. I was known when I was a philosophy student for being the one who made Christians cry. People left the room often. I bullied a lot of people who were either less educated, less mature, less studied in their faith. People who had sort of baseline evangelical faith are easy, low hanging fruit, and I bullied the hell out of them as a very aggressive agnostic or atheist. So it's a real conversion for me. People who knew me in that life are shocked to find out that I'm a vowed religious person now. Yeah, so there was personal unhappiness going along in parallel to my professional life as well.
A lot of character stuff and certain beliefs or ideologies you had that led to kind of a meaningless or a sense of meaninglessness. Can you tell us about the conversion experience?
Yes, and I'll put in a caveat there too. Well, I'll save that to the end, but left corporate life and I was essentially lost as to where I was going or what to do. I went on a silent retreat and not a structured silent retreat that is sold to people, which, by the way, don't fall for that. If someone is asking you to pay money for a retreat, ask yourself, you know, what is it that you're really after? So my silent retreat was I went to a group of sisters, a nunnery or an abbot, and an abbey with an abbot, I should say, and they have a house on their property that you can just stay in for free and make a donation if you like. So I went there and I stayed for 3 days out in the middle of the woods, interacting with no one, disconnected from phone, television, everything, just sitting in silence, which is very difficult for people to do. Generally speaking, it was difficult for me. And I was reading Thomas Merton's book, Seven Story Mountain, which is wonderful. And while reading it, I heard an audible voice tell me to put the book down. And I did so. And then I began a string of kind of stream of consciousness writing of whatever was going in my head. And then I heard an audible voice tell me, "You are to return to school and I will use you as a counselor." And it was just as though someone were standing there talking to me. Of course, I found this strange, to say the least. So I stood up and I thought, well, what am I supposed to do here? So I walked over. There was a Bible sitting there, kind of one of those large heirloom Bibles that anyone from the South knows gets passed down from generation to generation. And opened it up and opened it to one of the latter Psalms that's a psalm of praise. And I took the scripture outside and I stood on the deck and began to read the psalm. And as I was reading the psalm, a chipmunk and a lizard ran up and sat in front of me and listened to me read the psalm, or appearing to, right? And they were, whatever, sitting there looking at me. I read the psalm and then they left. And then I took a walk out towards the monastery where the sisters were located. And there was a sister there who had just gotten groceries. They have a community car they share. And she said, "How's your retreat going?" And I said, "I think God is talking to me." And she said, "I think he is too." I said, "Okay." And I kept walking. And then I walked for about 15 minutes in a state of what people would call religious ecstasy. If you've ever done hallucinogens, which I have, it is something like being on LSD or mushrooms or something where everything is hyper in hyper color, hyper texture. Went back to the retreat house, sat down, and I thought, okay, I'm a reasonable person. I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in spirits or ghosts or those sorts of things. I still don't. And I thought, I'm obviously under a lot of stress and I'm manifesting this as a self healing device, to give myself an answer. And then I heard an audible voice saying, "I've given you the answer, take it or leave it." And then as people say, the spirit left me. And I felt horribly depressed for quite some time. Maybe not depressed, but alone. So that was that. And my caveat to that story is I've had many people tell me that they long for an experience like that. Um, and I don't know why I had that experience. I'm ready to admit I don't know whether that was God. I don't know whether that was a spirit, a hallucination, a I don't know what. I don't have an explanation for that. It nonetheless has meaning and purpose, and I frame that as divine communication. And that sat in my pocket for about a year, and then someone approached me and said, "Have you ever thought about being a chaplain?" And the next week, I was in what we call pastoral care or clinical pastoral education. So I was back in school and I was essentially studying to be a counselor. And that's that.
But it wasn't an idea. I'm interested what you were reading in the book, what ideas were sticking out in the book, but it was a phenomenology that led to a dramatic shift in your life and the way you viewed the world, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've thought about this. The part I was reading was about Thomas Merton's discontent with the English church and becoming Catholic. It was very early in the book. And I don't know that those things had anything related. I mean, I don't know, whether that set the stage. I don't consider that really part of the story. I think I could have been reading the back of a cereal box, because certainly wasn't linked in any way that I can figure out. And it could be both and. It could be that it was generated by my own anxieties, and that is how God works. It could be, just generated through my own anxieties. I don't know. I've never had an experience since like that, um, nor have I ever had one prior to that. So I just don't have an answer to that. And that's part of, for me, embracing the mystery of faith. Although I'm sure we'll talk more about that, because again, I still do not believe I don't believe in souls. I don't have an opinion on the afterlife, and I'm agnostic as to God's existence, um, and still am.
Did you hear the voice out? You said it was audible, so you heard it from outside of your head?
Right. So it is so I work some in mental health populations. It is what would be considered an auditory hallucination. So a voice originating from outside the head that is just as though you were talking to me.
Just to get really specific, did it come
Hmm.
from like a part of the room? Does that make sense? Like almost if someone
Hmm.
was standing to the right of you, could you hear it from a localized place or was it everywhere that you heard the voice?
No, I think it was from behind me. I think that's no, I totally understand your question. It wasn't a booming voice. It certainly wasn't like Charlton Heston in old movies of Ten Commandments or anything, you know. It wasn't remarkable in that way. It was male, sounded male to me, although I don't believe in a gendered God. But yeah, it sounded like someone standing behind me.
And it sounded different from your own voice and like have
Yes.
you heard the voice before?
No. No, I'd never heard it before. It doesn't sound like anyone and doesn't sound like mine. And I mean, the thing is, I'm sure when people hear this, it's not a story I share often because I don't like pinning spirituality on anything that is esoteric or inaccessible or mystical in that way. I am a mystic, but that is a very specific definition in my tradition. I don't like revelatory stories in that way because they're inaccessible to other people and they sound extraordinary. But to me, even though that experience was extraordinarily meaningful, it's not like it doesn't seem strange to me now. It Yeah, it doesn't seem important in a big way. It seems like that is just part of my story. The places that are extraordinary to me are the things that I witness in the hospital or when working with patients. But my personal story doesn't. I don't know. I don't know how else to explain that other than saying it's just not that remarkable to me.
So can you tell us how your character began changing over the next couple months to year? Or maybe your orientation to life?
Yeah, yeah. There's a couple things going on there. I think one, I had a real time of self forgiveness. I had to really go through and decide I liked who I was and I like who I am. Um, most people find me, Josh apparently thinks I'm hilarious many times, and I don't know why he's laughing, but he laughs a lot at things I say. I can tell you that most of my peers find me odd in different ways. I never fit in with corporate America, really. I always felt like I was an immature kid trying to pretend to be an adult, and I still feel that way sometimes. So yeah, I had to really decide that I liked that. I like that I'm that way. I like that I'm quirky and strange. I'm gay. I like that I'm gay. Yeah, I just got to a place where I really liked who I was. And that was the beginning of healing for me because I realized how long I had been so hurtful and harmful to other people was driven because of my self-hatred. So that was step one, I think. And I started to lean into the fact that I am not important. I do not think that I am that important, nor do I think anyone listening to this is important. Um, I think my importance is the same as that of an ant or a chipmunk or lizard, for example. Um, I think we are likely either to all have souls or none of us. So I'm not anthrocentric in my thinking. And when I accepted that I was not going to do grand things with my life and that I'm really not that important and neither is anyone else, it really took pressure off of me to be okay with who I am and what I was doing and the little way that I live, and what little impact I have. I think framing things in that perspective allowed me to be authentic to other people. And authenticity to me is the seat of happiness. It's the seat of spirituality in your relationship to other people. Um, Being genuine to yourself, with yourself, and to others. And that's what really builds rapport and bridges of communication and love and healing to other people. So, yes, it was a gradual process, but I think it absolutely began with me loving myself. Last thing I'll just add to that is one great problem in philosophy and ethics is moral apathy. So that's where you might argue to a person, hey, we ought to care about the environment, and here's why. But if a person does not care, there are a lot of theories on how do you get another person to care about doing the right thing. Don't ask me. I don't know. I've arrived at the conclusion that you can't, because you can't argue someone into caring. I happen to be a person who cares. I don't think I did before, but I now do care about how my impact on other people. And some people aren't that way. So when people ask me about conversion or change of character, I wish I had a good answer to that other than um, it seems to me like some people naturally, if you naturally have a tug towards, hey, I really care about these issues, take it as a gift and a calling to a certain direction and let go of the fact that most people you meet do not care about the things you do. And that's okay.
Yeah, it sounds like a period of time where there was a lot of just maturing, um, and facing yourself, and maybe the character defects you had came from some type of inferiority, maybe about your sexuality, and maybe that's why you tried to dominate others intellectually, or I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Maybe. I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, who knows, right? We've talked about this before. You know my feelings on free will. I don't believe in free will. I'm a hard determinist. Um, why I am how I am, I don't know. I used to spend a lot of time thinking about what drove those things. I suspect, yeah, it had to do with feeling like an outsider, wondering if God loved me, whether I was, I grew up in a tradition that told me being gay was wrong. You went to hell for being gay. That was my adolescence. It's very traumatic. Now I don't spend a lot of time in self analysis in that way because that's part of my spiritual journey is to let go of belief. That means beliefs about myself, beliefs about God, beliefs about others, and focus on a actions based faith rather than a belief based or dogmatic faith.
How would you define being a mystic?
Yeah, so simply put, you uh, being a mystic is mailing an application when the moon is in the right segment of Jupiter. It's a little joke for Josh. I have no idea what I said, if that even makes any sense, but I give him a hard time about those sorts of things. So, mysticism, specifically in the religious tradition, is experience. It means having a being a mystic means giving authority to private experience, as opposed to other pillars of the church. So, traditional pillars are scripture or church tradition. Episcopalians also add reason, um, as in your faculties of reasoning, as a pillar of faith. Mystics um, give deference to personal um, experiential knowledge. So a non mystic might look for validation in scripture or something about the experience I just described earlier, my conversion experience. But a mystic would say, I don't, so long as it's not in contradiction to other pillars of faith. Why do we need to ask that question? Mysticism has been incorrectly, I think, enmeshed in the quote New Age or ancient religion revival. I think people, when you hear mystic, you think of crystals and incense and alternative medicine, homeopathic things and tinctures and cauldrons and whatever else. That isn't mysticism in the tradition, in the religious sense. So it is simply experiential knowledge of.
So maybe just a direct relationship to God of your understanding. No, nothing in between.
Maybe something like that. I mean, it could also be, I think conversations that you and I have had have been sacred moments that are mystical moments because they're experience that informs my understanding of who I am and my place. I think, waiting in line at a bank, if you're still one of those people who goes to the bank, which I can't imagine why anyone does, but apparently some people still physically walk into a bank, or waiting in line at a grocery store or whatever, and noticing how the mother in front of you is caring for their child who's crying, or how the bank teller gives the kid a lollipop at the end of the visit. Those are moments to which we bear witness that are extraordinary acts of humanity. And to me, what I glean from those experiences is certainly as deep as me hearing the voice of God. I don't see a difference between those.
A large part of maybe the generations from probably the 60s till today, I think it's still happening in Christianity and Judaism, maybe Islam, maybe all Western, religion. People just give up over things like what you talked about, if you're gay or something, you're not accepted by that community. I did. I left Christianity when I was very young and went to Buddhism. Why did you decide to stay with Christianity even though you were excluded by your group?
Yeah, a couple of ways to look at that. I mean, one, a primary reason I'm Christian is because I was raised in a Christian household. I was born in the United States. Chances are I'm going to be Christian. It'd be highly unusual for me to be Taoist, for example. Had I been born in certain parts of the Middle East, I'd likely be Muslim. So part of it is simply cultural identity. And for people who leave a faith, they usually leave it because there's an incongruency or there's some sort of um, internal dialogue that doesn't line up with what they've been taught to believe or what they're hearing from other practitioners of their faith, and they leave. The simple way to put that is, I don't believe this shit anymore, and they leave. And then they go looking for something else in place of that. And that can either be secular humanism, it could be some sort of esoteric religion, it could be one of the other mainstream religions or Eastern philosophies like Buddhism, because they're looking for a new metaphor of meaning in which to frame their life and experiences. That may work for some people, but if you choose a path that is not in line with your cultural identity inside of you, I believe there's always going to be some sort of a tension. I return to what I knew. I return to what was so formative in my life, in my youth. Even though I no longer associate with Southern Baptists, officially, that sounds as though I would never talk to a Southern Baptist person, which isn't what that meant. But, I'm no longer part of that church. There's the hymnal, everyone who's a Southern Baptist knows the Red Book hymnal, and I know most of those hymns. Um, that music still moves my soul in a way, moves me emotionally in ways that no other music does, because that's the music of my heart that I was born into. So there's some level of comfort to that. Secondly, I think I had to I developed an understanding of Christianity, and one, I encourage people, if you've never heard of Fowler's stages of faith, or I can't remember exactly how that's phrased. I think it's Fowler's stages of spiritual development, maybe. Don't quote me on that, but look into that if you aren't familiar with it. And it talks about people's spiritual development stages. Early on, most people in religions fall for the magic, and essentially God or whatever that is indistinguishable from Santa Claus or a genie. We ask the genie to do things, and the genie does it sometimes. And then we make up stories about why the genie sometimes heals grandma and why sometimes the genie lets grandma die. And it's a very transactional kind of faith. At some point, it was very hard for me to believe in certain things that I was taught in scripture. They seemed beyond my ability to really believe. And what happens when you lose belief in something? You can't, it's very odd. You can't force yourself to believe something. You can say you believe it, you can act as though you believe it. You cannot force yourself to believe, for example, let's say, does anyone here, think you could force yourself to believe that Obama is still president of the United States? No, you could say it, you could act as though he was, um, but could you really believe it? At some point, I realized I could not believe in some of the tenets of my early faith. What happens most of the time is we toss the whole thing out. We toss it out as magical thinking. Um, Perhaps we toss it out because of its political associations. We toss it out because it no longer aligns with our ethics. But there's a deeper understanding of faith later that comes from realizing if you start to see religion as structured metaphor of meaning, um, it allows you to come back into a living, practicable faith that doesn't require belief in magic or the supernatural. Um, and once I discovered that about Christianity, that there is a place for me to be Christian while not believing in magic, I felt comfortable again, and it felt right to me.
So let's talk about you moving into this line of work. Why were you drawn to this in particular? And maybe we can start talking about what your daily life is like, or maybe some important moments.
So drawn in particular was literally that someone approached me and said, "Have you thought about being a chaplain?" I didn't have a job, and the position offered to me was in a hospital. So, you know, that just happened. The door opened, so to speak. I soon found out that this was where I was supposed to be. And one thing I like about a trauma hospital in particular, is the fast pace. If you talk to nurses, for example, who work in a ED, the emergency department, they'll jokingly say they're trauma whores. Um, I get it. And there's something about, probably tied into adrenaline, partially. Uh, Partially, we're all just crazy. We're all a little bit unhinged. Um, but my day is not the same. Of course, I see the dead and dying constantly, but every person's story is new and different and unique. The medical cases are fascinating to me. I have a deep interest in medicine and science. How the human body works is fascinating. It scratches a lot of itches for me, intellectually and in giving care to people. Um, and most patients that I see for a period of maybe 15 to 30 minutes, and I'll never see them again. It's a real spiritual triage kind of position. Sometimes I work a long time with patients, but most of the time not. So there's just something that appeals to me about the drive-through nature of spirituality that you encounter as a trauma chaplain, as opposed to working long term with steady populations. or working. I know VA chaplains, for example, that see the same patients repeatedly for long periods of time. So yeah, I think that's just, I don't know, it's just who I am, that I'm, interested in that fast pace, and I don't ever get bored. There's rarely time to get bored. So typical day, as I said, I work a 12-hour, and I like to tell people, well, first, I always tell people, don't ask a chaplain how their day was. You just, you do not want to know. You might think you do, you don't. It's a better question to say, did you have a rough day? That's a good question, because I can answer it just yes or no, or sort of, or whatever. But I worked Christmas this year, and my Christmas shift began at 8, and at 8:30, I was called into a room of a woman who had severe burns, um, from a house fire on Christmas morning. Her skin was sliding off of her. She had extreme burns to over 30% of her body. Her hair was singed. The room smelled something of like barbecued pork. I remember that specifically, the smell of that room mixed with charcoal. I'd been called there because we had to tell her that her 9 and 11-year-old daughters had burned to death in the fire. That was Christmas for me. Um, I did the intervention. I stayed with her for about 2 hours. Then she was transported to a specialty burn hospital. I went back to my office, and I thought, there is no one I can call to talk to about this, because nobody wants to get called on Christmas morning and told that story. It is a deeply lonely space that I inhabit. Even other chaplains that weren't working that day, I would not have ruined their day, because guess what? Yesterday, they did something similar. And now that's their day off. I did eventually talk to my spiritual director, which I encourage everyone to have if you don't have one. It's essential in your growth. That was a safe space for me to unload, because you can't hold that trauma inside of you. It'll eat you up. So I did that. And then later in the day, I had a 5-week-old with extremely low blood oxygen. He's still ill, likely to die. I was with that family for a while. I had a couple of people having active heart attacks. Some of them died, some of them lived. I had one person who was brain dead, who was on a ventilator, and the family did not want to take him off the ventilator until 1 minute after midnight, so he would, quote, not die on Christmas. Um, that's what I recall from the day. So that's a particularly horrendous story, but it isn't that atypical compared to other days. And I would say that represents kind of what a hospital chaplain is doing on most days.
So what are you doing service-wise for these people in these critical moments? Are you praying for them? Are you just accompanying them through this, or how would you explain it?
So chaplaincy, a chaplain provides spiritual and emotional care to patients and families. So it's a very broad definition, and we work in a really gray area that is somewhere between a minister, in a religious sense, a counselor, although we are not counselors, nor physicians. And yeah, we're in this gray area between the two. Kind of the core principle of chaplaincy is that you do not impose your own beliefs on your care recipients, and you meet them where they are. So if I am working with someone who identifies as Christian and they ask, I do not proactively pray. If they ask me to pray, I'm happy to pray with them. If they want to hear a confession, give a confession, or have an anointing or some sort of ritual. I baptized several people that have been asked to be baptized. Um, or we will just sit and talk about their family, or they'll tell me how they're feeling, and I'll help them work through their feelings if they're non-religious. If they're, if they're satanic, we're going to pray to Satan together. If they're Buddhist, I might lead them through some sort of meditative practice. So we are expected to provide support for people of all faiths and non-faith, and it's very intuitively driven. Some people want to make a decision about whether they're going to amputate their leg or not, and I'll help them work through the decision of whether to go through with that surgery. Some people just want someone to talk to and pass time. Some people want to reassurance that they're not going to hell for what they've done in their past. Um, yeah, it's very broad, but we attend to all the things that modern medicine doesn't attend to that has to do with wellness.
One of the things that stuck out to me that you said, I think this is when we first met, you said, I'm not that important, but God places me into situations or circumstances that are incredibly important for other people.
Yeah.
Can you explain that? Well, that was one of my favorite ideas you've told me.
I don't know. I read it in a book somewhere. I'm just kidding. Um, yeah, what's extraordinary about doing ministry is I'm just a normal person. I don't have any more answers than other people do. I might have spent a longer time thinking about certain things that you haven't, or studying something that you haven't. Um, I mean, obviously, I'm equipped and educated in chaplaincy in a way that non-chaplains aren't. But in the end, I'm just some dude. And I wear a habit, meaning the monk's robe is called a habit. And people see me in that and they assign me some degree of religious authority. We call it pastoral authority. And that authority is given and created by them. That's of their own making. They decide I'm the ones who they can't baptize their baby. They need a quote official person to baptize their baby. And they see me as official. That's extremely um, humbling that someone would regard me as having some sort of special place for a sacred moment in their life. I'm just a stranger to them. So that phenomenon of being that person is sometimes overwhelming. I don't go looking for those opportunities. I'm invited into them in really amazing ways. Um, and I think all people outside of, if you are not a minister or you're not in some position like that, I I think all people can be invited into private places. All people are called into some sort of ministry of whatever that means, of healing work for other people. And you have to be very tender with that and understanding the enormous power that you hold when someone is vulnerable and allows you into that space. Um, and it's complicated because if you're going to function in that way, you're not their friend. Um, you're not invited to be pals with them. You can be invited into something that is in which you hold all of the power, and what words you say to them are going to resonate in their head. So yeah, that's what I mean by that. I'm I'm somehow called into those positions, although I'm not worthy of such things.
It kind of reminds me of, I've been thinking about religious symbols and these, like having a crucifix in the room or some type of statue is a way of making the invisible visible or giving it a place, a way to anchor it into the space. And that kind of sounds like what you're doing, right? Is
Mm.
that you're anchoring this idea into the space, but also you're letting it act through you, or you're representing that in some way, or the people are projecting onto you because you have the outfit on.
Mm.
Is that kind of right?
Yeah, I think so. I think I somewhat walk in as a projection screen.
Ask some questions.
Sure.
This is incredibly fascinating. I can't believe I understand also the gravity of what you're going through too. It's very serious. But
Mm,
um I definitely did not fully grasp like what you were doing, especially in terms of how you're saying that you'll even step into other people's religions or like, their belief systems,
mm,
and be there to help maybe like anoint them in that in their system. I assumed that you were working through only like, you know, I don't want to say the word pushing, but like through Christianity and using that to pray over them. Like,
mm.
does that um isn't that kind of like stepping out of your religion then if you're meeting people where they are in theirs?
No, my um, well, one, I'm glad. I'm for whatever reasons, I'm glad you find it fascinating. I should say first that because I told Josh, I said, no one cares what I have to say, and he said, I think some people will find it interesting. So that's, I'll take that as somewhat complimentary, whether it was intended as such or not. I tell people often that the reason I left the Baptist church was that God became too big to fit into that church for me. My God is too big to fit into one mode of faith. So, I think we're all in the same we're all in the same store. I'm just walking to a different aisle, maybe. So instead of picking up my holy water, I'm picking up water from the Ganges or something for a Hindu patient. Or yeah, I'm just using a different set of tools. Presenting as a different practitioner. My religion, my faith teaches me that I do not have the answers. Far be it from me to think that I know what is going on. I am I'm struggling like all of us trying to figure out how to make sense out of chaos. And I believe that I'm ought to love other people. And loving other people means being spiritually poor or practicing spiritual poverty. Spiritual poverty is one of the vows that we take as Franciscans. We, in my order, refer to it as simplicity. Traditionally, it's understood as poverty. That doesn't simply refer to material wealth. It means letting go of things that give me comfort. Things that give me comfort might include a Christian God or a Christian narrative. How am I to be fully present to another person who, say, practices Buddhism? If I walk in and I'm holding on to my faith, I'm going to be viewing them through a lens of my own faith. I'm going to be analyzing their statements through my own faith. It's disingenuous to them. So, if anything, letting go of my religion, stepping outside of my religion, if you want to use kind of the phrase you used, is just leaning further into my faith and religion. Because my faith, Christianity calls us to be uncomfortable. Jesus called people to go be with those that they did not want to be around. And if you look at who Jesus called for his disciples, being tax collectors and people who were ordinary people or reviled by society, he calls the least of us into the greatest. Deeply, I believe, deeply spiritual people have nothing to lose by stepping into the narrative of others, because that is my narrative, is to go into those of others. And then I'll just say, traditionally, there are people, I have known people who came into chaplaincy. It did not work for them because they were very married to their specific faith, their specific version of Christianity. They believed they had to sell out to go and pray for a Satanist, for example. They'd never do that. I know many chaplains that say they would never, ever do that. There are lots of reasons for that. But what that means is I refuse to serve this child of God because I care more about my own beliefs, my own certainty, than I love this other person, even though their faith calls them to love all people. So those who think they are stepping out of their tradition or their religion, what it really is they're not embracing their religion. They're embracing their own anxieties, and they're giving in to discomfort out of some failed attempt to hang on to their certainty that gives them comfort. Um, so no, a good chaplain and anyone who's been educated through traditional accredited chaplaincy programs are taught very explicitly, you are there to meet people where they are.
Wow, that is like so powerful, I think. I also was wondering with that then, if you step into other religions with alongside people, does that mean that you also have to study a whole bunch of different religions so then you're able to like meet them where they are?
Yeah, to some degree, yes. Um, One area that's very specific. So first, let me say, I am no expert. I'm not even an expert on my own faith. I'm undereducated. I am ignorant of more than I am knowledgeable, and I certainly hold no expertise. Um, I am genuine with people, and I do think I'm kind now. I don't think I used to be kind, but I think I'm kind. So, so yes, we have to know, for example, variations on beliefs that have to do with what happens after someone dies. It is natural for people to say when someone dies, they're in a better place, which please, if you get anything from this, don't ever say that to another person who is grieving. Just don't. It's possibly in good with good intent, but it's a stupid thing to say, just point blank. And we say things like this because most of us don't know what to say when someone dies. We don't know how to give grief care. We're terrible at death in our society. But some people believe that a soul immediately goes to heaven. Some people believe the soul goes to sleep and awaits a final judgment. Some people don't believe in souls. Some people believe that you have to be buried within a certain amount of time. There are people who believe that the soul needs to be let out of the room. So you would open a window to allow the soul to escape to heaven. So there are lots of little idiosyncrasies like that that are helpful to know to be able to provide adequate care. That being said, the reality of what I experience, for one, because of the population I serve, are mostly Christian, overwhelmingly Christian, which makes my job a little easier in that way. Um, but my focus are on things. The thing about people who are asking for a ritual, they aren't saying baptize my baby. What they're saying is, I just lost my baby. I am terrified of where they are now. Are they gone? Is my daughter in heaven? Is my daughter in hell? Is my daughter in limbo? Why is it the world is still going on around me? Can't anyone see that I just lost my child? That's what they're saying. So when they say baptize my baby, all of that is caught up in that. And what they're asking for is, I want a ritual that helps me to remember my child, that honors the dignity of my child, that is a landmark in my story. I'll forever remember this. Um, it's a reassurance that God loves us. So when I have to go into spaces that aren't a Christian ritual, what they're really asking for is the same thing in a different flavor. They're asking for healing, remembrance, importance, dignity. They don't care so much. Some do. There are some people, for example, that only want to speak to a Catholic chaplain or a Baptist chaplain. or a Muslim chaplain, and that's okay. And I obviously immediately get them in touch with who they want. But most of the time, I've heard people confess things to me who come from a tradition that is not a confessing sort of tradition. I've baptized people according to rituals that we would use in the Episcopal Church, but these folks are Baptist or non-denominational or even non-believers. I've done end of life rituals for people who are atheists and anointed them because that's really what they need. They don't care so much about the specifics. They just want something real and tangible that answers that need. Does that address your question? Was there another question in that?
Yeah, I mean, um, as usual, I have a million questions, but goodness gracious, it's like it's so much to um, so much feeling behind these things that you're saying that it's like a lot to absorb.
Mm.
But do you ever feel like lost in it? Like, not lost in it. Do you ever feel a little bit like because it's so many different religions? Like, for instance, I'm studying all these different religions, but goodness gracious, it takes so much time. Like,
Mm.
like, don't you ever feel when you're helping someone through these things like, oh, I don't really know that much about this religion or something? Maybe you feel a little lost?
Um, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. I mean, I'm lost 24/7. Uh, my life is essentially a series of fortunate stumblings. So uh, that's that's number one, I think. Yeah, and I like that. I like that it's somewhat all of a haze. What a beautiful haze we live in, and how much time we spend longing for certainty, only to find out the answers and be so disappointed because the mystery was more exciting than the answer. So that's my general approach to life, for one. Two, practically speaking, as I said, most people I encounter are Christian or non-theist. I don't encounter too many esoteric religions, although I did recently serve some Baha'i patients and their families, and I had to learn some about the Baha'i faith. One thing to stress is the bulk of work that I do is not what people would think is religious. And most people think a chaplain is in the room doing religious things. I think I probably pray in 30% of my visits. I probably do a ritual in 15% of my visits. Um,
Tell me about the boy you played video games with.
yeah, so I had a child that was a 9-year old, and I can talk about this in general terms. So our rules about confidentiality obviously are no identifiable features of a patient, but I can talk in general terms about the trauma of this child. So he had been raped by his father and then thrown down the stairs, and he had a broken C-spine, a couple of fractures in the C-spine. And when I visited him, he longed to return to his father, to his abuser, which is typical of those who are victims of abuse. And my intervention with him was playing Mario Kart. And damn, was that kid good in Mario Kart. And I'm not that bad, but he whooped my ass several times. Um, and frankly, I don't take it easy. You ask me to play a game, I'm giving it my all, which made it even worse how bad he how badly he beat me. Um, and we laughed a lot together. And I would occasionally ask him probing questions. Ministering to kids is a bit of an art. Um, they have to let you in when they're ready to let you in. I mean, people are that way too, but a lot of times people let you in because of obligation. They see the chaplain coming. I walk in, it's like, oh, we got to talk about God. We got to talk about church. We got to, they have these notions of proper behavior. Children, being these self-obsessed little assholes they are, and what beautiful things they are. They're No child ever comes up to you and says, mommy, is this a good time for me to tell you my feelings? Like, that's Oh, what they do. So kids don't have these expectations, which makes them wonderful because when they open up and they say something, you know it comes from them and not out of obligation or respect for your position in life because they don't give a damn who you are. So he would occasionally open the door into conversations about his trauma. But the majority of our time was spent playing video games. I've spent time building Legos with patients. We're talking about art or movies or music. Um, because the interesting thing about a chaplain is we are we're the one person in the hospital that they see that isn't trying to do something to them. Every specialist they see, every physician, every CNA or RN or NP or DO or all these letters, they're coming in, they're poking them, they're prodding them, they're quantitatively collecting data on them. They're telling them what they should or shouldn't do. They're assessing them. Um, Even the family members, because they're so emotionally tied up, are saying, Dad, you need to start taking your heart pills, or I told you you should be checking your blood sugar, or whatever. Chaplains are the one group of folks who come in who just are there as a presence. We're just there to bear witness with them and to help them with what they need, but we're not there to do anything to them. We're not there to measure them or poke or prod them. We're also uniquely in a space where we can be refused. Um, you can refuse medical care. There are times you can't. Um, if you're not mentally sound or if you're unconscious or something and they decide to put you on a ventilator and you haven't decided that, people are making that decision for you. But when the doctor comes in, they can't really refuse them, but they can a chaplain. I can come to the door and say, Hey, I'm the chaplain. Do you want to talk? And they say no. And I say, okay. And what's so cool about that is that's the one person they're allowed to say no to in the hospital. And the best intervention for them might have been regaining a tiny bit of autonomy in essentially what is a prison for them.
Chaplain, I am just so thoroughly impressed with your humility. That comes out loud and clear over everything else. And your ability to really put your population front and center and their needs, not your needs. And that is so refreshing and startling at the same time. I love how you go into it without ego. It's not about your title, it's not about your knowledge. It's about how can I serve. And I just wanted to say I am, mind blown by that. I also had a question for you, and that is, do you go into situations ever feeling like there is absolutely nothing I can do here?
Thank you for the kind words, first off. So, yeah. I mean, the knee jerk reaction to that is yes. Of course, we go into situations where, like, what am I doing here? you know, how can I be of use? There is some bias in some hospital systems um, towards chaplaincy, thinking that we are essentially the appendix of the medical community and have no purpose. Although that's recently been challenged by science as to whether the appendix has a purpose, but we won't go down that road. What's interesting though is every interaction I go into is one I can do nothing. The thing about pastoral care of people, it's somewhat like therapy. The therapist really can do nothing for that person's depression. Not really. They can hand them tools. They can give words of affirmation. They can escort people through the darkest times. They can celebrate the good times. That's the same as a chaplain, and that's the same as all of us, because in truth, this goes back to being important or lack of being important, really. In truth, we can do nothing there's very little we can do. I'll say that. I won't say we can't do anything. Most of the impact we have on other people is about igniting something within them. It's about showing up to them that prompts them to have a change from within. Everyone knows that therapy does not work on patients who are non-compliant, right? It's a waste of time. It's a waste of everyone's time. So to that end, every interaction that I have is approached with, I can do nothing but for their participation. More tangibly, there are situations where the patient has decided, or the family of the patient has decided, um, we don't want your services. And that is where the more normal notion of there's nothing I can do is at play. Because the truth is, I have to triage my needs. I think last time I worked, I may have had, let's say, 4 traumas, a couple of code blues, several urgent rapid calls. I have a lot of workload, a big workload. And those folks who refuse my services, I have to cut loose and go on. And you have to triage in that way. But rarely does that happen. And even in situations where I had someone come in with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was middle-aged. He was actively dying. He came in asystolic, which means without a heartbeat. They tried to revive him, briefly regained a pulse, and then immediately died again. He was declared dead. And I was in the trauma bay because we stand in the trauma bay when they come in. So I'm just over in the corner and walking through blood and brains and things that fall off of people. And I walked up and I said a very general prayer over him. I was hesitant to do so in some ways because this person may have been an atheist or someone who doesn't practice prayer. And um, that I would never pray, and I have refused prayer over patients where families have asked me to go in and pray over a patient, and I've learned that the patient was not a person of prayer, and I've refused to do so, and they get very angry at me. Um, but I'm just not going to do that. That's just very disrespecting uh, someone's autonomy. Nonetheless, I did it, and I don't know if I did it for myself. Um, I don't know why I did it, but I said a quiet prayer and just thanking God for this person's life. And I prayed that someone missed them. I just prayed that somehow this person's life was not lived in vain and they were meaningful. They were somebody to someone. Later that night, I got called back to the emergency department, and family had arrived for this victim. And I went out with the physician to tell the family this person had died. And I said, tell me about them. And they let me know about them, their life a little bit. And I asked them, are you persons of any particular faith or belief? And they told me they were kind of non-specific, God-believing people. And I said, well, I wanted you to know that when he came in, I prayed over him as he died. And mm, and the woman collapsed. She she collapsed in gratitude. And she said, I'm so glad my son didn't die alone. So, so when I think about visits like that, um, what I did, I don't know, but I did something for her. Um, I did something to honor her son's life, and That's why even a patient coming in who is essentially dead, I can still do something for them. We've had John Does come in who are unhoused, unknown, unloved, who die in filth and squalor, and no one ever visits them or claims them. And I still go in. I don't pray, but I just stand with them. I bear witness to their death. Um, and that's as much as I can do, but I did something. So it's a long way of answering. I can do nothing always, and I'm doing nothing always until it is something for someone. And that's how I approach my ministry.
Thank you, Chaplain. That was extraordinary. I'm so moved, and I'm a therapist myself, school psychologist, licensed mental health worker, and I had to rearrange my schedule in order to be here, and it was so well worth it. I really felt a shift in my perspective in terms of what we can do and what we can't do, and the respect that you have first and foremost to the people you work with, that comes out loud and clear. And I can understand why Josh holds you in such high regard, because I've been doing this for 28 years. I haven't met anybody who is, we have a term called client centered. I haven't met anyone as client centered as you are. And yeah, thank you deeply
Hmm.
for that shift. Thank you. I needed it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I will say, for those who are involved in therapy work or mental health care or some discipline related to that, there are modalities and methodologies and things that that you work in. And I think that about being client centered is the entire focus of chaplaincy. We have assessment diagnostic instruments and those sorts of things that we learn. People use different tools, operate in different ways. But because we are not part of an established behavioral science system in the way that other practices are. So if you do cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, you're going to be working within a certain methodology with certain expectations and applications. Chaplains are in that gray area, as I said, that is both horribly frustrating to explain to people what we do, and also extremely freeing, because I'm not a practitioner. You know what I mean? I'm not exercising a discipline or applying a methodology per se. Um, I'm adapting. It's a very intuitive art that we practice. Um, that can seriously get therapists in trouble. um, but I do think it's indicative of a chaplain on the right path if they're ready to let go and let be. But I appreciate the affirmation. That's kind of you.
One of the themes that I see as standing out is just developing and being a presence that's just accepting and receiving whatever is happening, and maybe with a lean towards compassion. Um, can you talk about the type of presence you bring to these moments?
Yes. I wish I could remember. There's an article I encourage everyone to read called "Fried Chicken and Weak Tea," as in TEA. I cannot remember this chaplain's name, but he is a humanist, non-theist chaplain, which is the fastest growing area of chaplaincy. Humanist chaplains, non-religious chaplains. But You'll have to forgive me for not recalling his name, but yeah, fried chicken and weak tea. And he talks about how someone on death row had requested for their last meal fried chicken and tea. Instead, he was served something along the lines of like soggy chicken nuggets and some kind of crap. Now, this person, I don't remember what they had been accused of doing, and they were executed. But he talks about the fact that he didn't like the person. He may not have been empathetic to that person, but he was furious at the lack of compassion because it would have taken just one person in that string of people who brought the guy his fried chicken, whoever drove out to get it, or the warden who ordered it, or the person who served it, to stop and think, this is a human being that we were about to execute. Can we not serve him fried chicken? Is that too much of us to ask? It's the famous adage or about you can tell the most about a society by how they treat their prisoners and their animals. It's how society treats the least of these by which you judge their character. Practicing compassion does not require feeling or empathy. It is an active act. It's in actions that you take to show compassion. Empathy is great. Empathy is what we should lean into. But in the times which we cannot have empathy, we can practice compassion. I think that's the presence I try to bring. I am mostly empathetic to people. There are times where it's difficult. But what I've found in practicing compassionate acts towards people is that I've also grown in empathy. It's a bit of a fake it until you make it strategy. So when I'm called to a situation, for example, with an abused infant, and I have parents who have shaken their baby to death, young parents, 19 and 20 years old, they've never had a baby, they're still young. First off, anyone who's been around a crying baby that is colicky and will not stop crying, um, if you don't have the impulse to just shut the baby up, you're a better person than I. You can reach a point of frustration and exhaustion in your life with someone screaming in your face for 5 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours. You haven't slept in 3 days. That will break a person, period. I don't care who you are. You can think you are, better than the rest of us. But as we have seen through, um, such as the experiments that, and I, maybe one of the behavioral science folks will remind me, it wasn't Milgram, maybe it was Milgram's experiments about trying to figure out how the Nazis committed atrocities. I don't remember. As I said, I'm undereducated. Um, that's good, by the way. I can always fall back on that and say, well, I just don't know. But anyway, we have shown that people can be driven to do terrible things, no matter who they are. Knowing that, when I went and ministered to these patients, and the baby's there on life support, and the parents are lying. Probably, I mean, I suspect they're lying about having shaken their baby. They say they found the baby and they don't know why it's dead, essentially. All the nurses have made up their mind, not knowing any of the facts other than we're waiting on brain scans, but they've made up their mind. And the doctors have made up their mind. Everyone's decided these people are guilty. They likely were. They were arrested. Nonetheless, I was called in to minister to these folks. While I was with them, my thought was, how terrible must these parents feel that their lack of experience and their frustration and lack of social support caused them to kill their child? How sad is that? How Imagine the burden that you must carry, that a split second decision to shake a baby that won't stop crying killed a human being, killed the human being you created, that you were entrusted to care for. And now everyone you encounter will think you are terrible. They don't care what you've done for the previous 19 years. The mistake you made in that instant makes you a piece of shit forever. You'll go and do your time in prison. And then when you're released and people find out you killed a baby, you're still a piece of shit. You will never be able to be authentic and tell anyone about what you did because of that. That's terribly disheartening and upsetting. I mean, it's overwhelming. Um, that's how I showed up for those people, and that's how I exercised compassion and empathy. It wasn't judgment of what they had done in that mistake, and it was a mistake. It was just it was a mistake, and they deserve to be loved, and they deserve to be understood, as much as that child deserves to be mourned and respected as a victim of something terrible. There were 3 victims that day, the child and the 2 parents.
I want to expand this wisdom right here to the greater culture. People are becoming more and more tribal. Lines of communication are shutting down between these groups that are in conflict all over the world. There's an extraordinary lack of compassion. I don't know, with your daily life and witnessing these realities and the insights you've gained, what do you think people need to hear right now with the state of the way things are?
Um, People somewhat need a message, a reminder that who cares, because in billions of years we're all burning up as we collapse into the sun and the universe reaches a heat death of entropy, and then existence will no longer be. I obviously say that somewhat jokingly. However, I do believe that. I do believe that everything we do will be destroyed eventually. I don't know that we can escape heat death of the universe, although if people are interested in that, you should read some Teilhard de Chardin. He's an interesting person to look into if you're curious about the marriage of science and and religion. But in all seriousness, that truly realizing that everything is impermanent and in a sense nothing matters is how I view the overall problem of existence and meaning. It's been a while since I looked at the statistics, but I keep one in my back pocket. It may have been in 2022 that every day 19,000 people under the age of 18 die from hunger in the world every day. My numbers are probably off now. Let's just say it's a lot of people. When something like something terrible happens, such as the situation I just described with the abused child or dying baby, in the grand scheme of things, that isn't that big of a deal. That may sound terrible and it may sound harsh, but it's true. It's the entire world to those parents. It's the end of their life, essentially. Um, it's if you lose a child, you'll never be the same. It will forever impact your reality. It's terrible. But when you stand back from the earth and back up to the galaxy and to the universe, it's nothing. It's the death of an ant, if that. I mean, it's more like the dissolution of an atom because we're so tiny. So that's what gives me perspective. And it relieves me of the burden of thinking that I'm so pivotal at such a pivotal moment in time and I'm so important and oh my God, did you see what happened just, minutes ago and who got shot and who's died and what's going on politically and all of that. Because I don't think our problem is not caring. I think most people care about something. It's just we care about different things. So I care about mistreatment of immigrants and dispossessed and marginalized populations. I care deeply about that. The folks who are propagating this movement, who are forwarding the movement towards something like white Christian nationalism or fascism or whatever label you want to put on it, it's not that they don't care. It's they have a different set of values and caring. It's that our values don't align. So awareness campaigns of like, let's make everyone aware of breast cancer. I think most people are aware of breast cancer, you know. Um, I don't think awareness or caring is the problem. I actually think it's that we spend so much of our time caring about things outside of our sphere of influence. And we become so anxious and so worked up about what could happen that we have no control over, that we essentially become impotent within our sphere of influence. And if we were able to set aside the idea that we are so important or the gravity of our situation, we might be able to look at the opportunities that are directly in front of us to love and be present for other people, because that's all we can do. So I think overall, the message people need to hear is I don't know what our future holds for our society. I don't know what our future holds for each of us individually. Um, I just don't know. Um, I limit my intake of information. I listen to a news briefing on the way to work, and I listen to a news briefing on the way home from work. And that's all the news I consume. I don't consume social media, other than occasionally I do like to laugh at cat videos. Um, but you know, I don't take the bait for a lot of the rage baiting that's going on. Um, Whatever happens, it's going to be okay, because eventually all things will come to an end. And that end will either be the heat death of the universe, or heaven, or something glorious, or a transformation into another dimension, or, you know, lizard people appearing and realizing we're all part of a alien colony. I mean, who the hell knows? I don't know. But whatever will be, will be. And that's okay. It's worked out for millennia. It's going to be okay.
One last thing I want to ask you is, as someone who's spent a lot of time around you, humor seems to be extremely important to not only dealing with, the hardest aspects of life, but also your survival, your mental health, and you just getting through the day. You're always making jokes.
That's
Can
true.
can
That's
you
true.
can you say the importance of humor to you?
Yes, for one, I think adults are boring. I am in my late 40s now, and most people my age are so fucking boring. Um, I don't want to talk about investments and 401k plans. I mean, I have those things, but do we want to talk? I mean, look, I guess I shouldn't pass judgment here. If that's your shtick, great, have at it. It's just, I'd rather laugh at a good fart joke. Yeah, I mean, isn't it interesting that we have such fun for most of us in our childhood. Some of us have terrible childhood stories. Most of us at some point, even those who are victims of abuse and things, have some memories of being happy, self self-fulfilling happiness, playing and imagining and exploring and wondering and being in awe and all of that, right? And then as we grow older, we take on more and more burdens to where we essentially are constantly living our lives worried about the future or lamenting the past. We are very rarely present. We've created an entire industry of mindfulness. We have apps on our phone that'll ring a bell every now and then and remind us to whatever, listen to our breathing. Um, you can tell how I feel about some of those. I mean, if it helps you, it helps you. But it's just interesting because the real way to just be and live is just stop being so damn serious. Like that's my take. That's humor for me. Is there is an absurdity to life. I'm involved in a religion that believes that a man died, came back to life 3 days later, ate a fish after walking through a wall, and then floated into outer space. That's bonkers. That's crazy. Um, and then there are people who are setting a quartz rock on top of a dollar bill thinking it's whatever, going to bring them money tomorrow. That's bonkers, right? Life is just nuts. It's nuts that we're having this podcast while thousands of people just died. In the past 2 hours, thousands of people have died. Think about how terrible I am, or laugh at the absurdity of it all. So there is so much absurdity in life in what we spend our time doing, um, how clueless we are to the outside world. And that's needed because if we all sat around thinking about all the terrible things in the world, we would be useless and we would waste our own lives in worry. How terrible is that we've added one more victim to the count of victims, right? So that's humor to me. Humor is admitting that it's okay to laugh at terrible things. Anyone who knows anybody who works in healthcare knows that we all have a terribly dark sense of humor. Just terrible. We're just terrible people. Um, that's how we cope. Because what do you want me to do? Do you want me to go back home and cry? Do you want me just to be sad? Um, Lighten up. That's my advice to people: is try to laugh more. Find silly things that make you laugh. Be silly with other people. Pull people out of their comfort. The next time you interact with someone who's having a bad day and they're checking you out or something, I did this today at a governmental office. I said, have people been nice to you today? And they were shocked. I asked them that question. Um, and they kind of just looked at me. I said, well, everybody knows that everyone hates you guys, you're government employees. And they just laughed and we laughed together. And because it's true, you know, help other people, um, help other people let go a bit and have a moment of fun instead of being worried about every cause and all the work we have to do.
Brother, I have one more question for you about, actually, I could go on for hours, but I'll keep it to one. In terms of what you would suggest people say to someone who has just gone through something overwhelming, a loss, say. I know you said before, if you take one thing away from this, just don't say they're in a better place. Do you have something that is sort of, a formula for what to say? Is it just being present? Is it, no one particular thing? How do you go into a situation like that and provide support?
Excellent question. So I think um, what you've got to do first is assess what the person is grieving. So again, much like when a person says, I want my child baptized, they're not actually asking for baptism, they're asking for those other things I mentioned. When someone is grieving, they're grieving something other than a dead body. They're If they're grieving a young person, a young child, what they're really grieving is the fact that this child will never have a prom, will never graduate, will never, produce grandkids, never have their own home, all of that stuff. Never play t-ball, you know. An older person, someone who's lived a very long life, they're grieving the loss of a father who was supportive of them, or grandpa who made them laugh, a cousin who affirmed their sexuality when none of the rest of the family would. Um, Sometimes they're overwhelmed with regret. Sometimes everyone is grieving something different. So the first step, I think, is ensuring that you understand what their loss is. And that simply comes from asking for their story. It comes from um, asking them, who was this person to you? Tell me about them. Um, for an infant, I had done a ritual over a miscarried child that was essentially a half-formed fetus. Um, I it's just like, what do you say to that? Well, you can say, did your child have a name? And they'll tell you where did that name come from? Why is that special to you? Um, so yeah, first assess what the person's really grieving, and let them tell you what it is that they have lost. The second thing is, um, nothing you say is going to be helpful. Nothing. For people who have done grief work, the truth is it's time. It's how much time has passed since the loss that heals. People don't get over grief because somebody said something extraordinarily meaningful to them. It's not the way grief works. Except that your role there is not to give advice, it is not to analyze or assess or process. It's not to stick lipstick on a pig, as we say. Um, it's to be present because the person is horribly alone and no one can feel what they're feeling. So that's my two bits of advice. Is often it's best to say nothing and don't assume why that person is crying. I had, for example, just once um, a brother of a patient died and the brother was weeping. Most people would assume he's really sad about his brother dying. What he was sad about is he never got to talk to his brother about his abuse in his childhood. He never got to confront his abuser, and the guy died before he could. That's what he's grieving. And had I made an assumption about why he was grieving, I'd have said, I'm so sorry your brother's gone. And he is too, but for a completely different reason than you would think.
Do you think that um, dealing with, death so much, do you think that it brings you in your personal relationships? Do you feel like it creates distance or makes it harder for you to connect to people? Or do you think, it brings you closer because you understand that they won't be there forever? Or is it something else?
In my personal life, certainly me being around so much death has made me value small things much more greatly, just in general. Realizing impermanence makes me, look at a sunset a little longer. It makes me um, complain about my husband a little less. you know, um, it makes me see things that annoyed me instead as little idiosyncrasies of that person that I'll miss. Um, One thing in particular, this is very specific, is my partner always forgets to cap things, like to put the cap back on things. So almost every morning of my married life, I go into the bathroom and the tube of toothpaste is open. And I used to say, you didn't cap the toothpaste. You didn't cap the toothpaste, He never does, still doesn't. I've realized that if he died, I will never walk into the bathroom and see an uncapped tube of toothpaste again. And boy, does that reframe what that is. That gives it an entirely different meaning. So I see a lot of things in that light now. As far as the trauma work that I do, it is horribly alienating. I've had to do a lot of personal grief work and work on myself and how I process trauma, because it's really hard for me to be in groups of people who are complaining about something that I view as trivial, but it's important to them. Uh, you know, being around people who are upset because the wedding invitations have a typo on them. I am the wrong friend for you. You do not want me in that group because, my thought is, aren't you glad you have a wedding? Like, let me tell you about what I saw today, you know, or let me tell you about my Christmas. Oh, you didn't get the gift you wanted for Christmas. How sad. Um, you weren't burned to death and your children weren't killed. And those thoughts go through my head. Now, the thing is, that's an unrealistic expectation for me to have of other people. I can't expect other people's frame of reference to be mine. It's unfair of me. It's unkind of me. It lacks humility. So there's a constant game of check that I'm playing in my head, of checking myself, I should say, that has to remind me that we are all bound to our own frame of reference and experiences. I do believe everyone is just doing the best they can do. Um, but but yeah, there is a degree that it's sort of like the Matrix, that once you've taken the pill, you can't undo it. Most people have no idea what's going on in a hospital. People are One of the most shocking things to me was the amount of people that die in a hospital. Every week we do a ceremony to honor those who have died privately with the chaplains. And we're usually reading 30 to 50 names every week, and we're a fairly small hospital. Um, yeah, I'll never unknow that, and most people don't know those things. Um, so yeah, it's a little bit it's a bit alienating, but at the same time, it's extraordinarily fulfilling, and it does make me an appreciative person as much as I can be. I just try to be thankful every time I get asked at the hospital how I'm doing, how my day's going. My answer is, well, I'm not in a hospital bed, so I'm doing great.
Any other questions, guys? Ron, haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, no, I was thank you for being here today and for sharing everything. I'm trying to think how to to process and try to understand and what I can apply and learn from the last hour and a half. But what else? What else do you do to, aside from certain types of standard therapy, to vent or to release from the trauma? Because there's got to be something that's that assists with that. Um,
Mhm.
it's just an overwhelming thing. I would think you've got to, if you can't tell somebody and you can't, explain to me, you've got to unload it somewhere. And I don't know what you would do for that. I would think you would have to refresh your mind.
Yeah, this is the classic question of self-care. Um, and it's for me, and I just told Josh this. The first thing I do when I get home is I sit down and play video games. I'm a gamer. I love to and I play games where you destroy things. I play very like traditional boy-centered games, uh, things like Battlefield 6, for example. And yeah, I turn my brain off for a period of time and play video games for maybe 30 minutes. Then I'll eat, because often I don't get to eat very much during my shifts. Um, I'll call a friend and laugh about things, talk about their day or whatever. Connect. The worst possible thing you can do is isolate. So um, yeah, I have to do some kind of activity that just puts the brakes on thinking. And usually for me, that is either, yeah, for me, honestly, it's video games. During work, I will take time to walk outside, um, but or sit in nature. I'll watch a funny video, anything that just um, allows me to pause in as far as thinking. I do have a spiritual director, as I said. I talk to him very, very frequently. All vowed religious people are expected in my community to have a spiritual director, and that's pretty universal among all vowed Christian communities, at least, um, to help process traumatic stuff. I do not talk to my husband about things. Early in chaplaincy, I came home and I told him about something horrible I had seen, and he just said, I don't really want to hear about that." And
Mm.
it wasn't out of cruelty. It's too much. It's too much for him to hear that. So I don't talk to him about those things. Um, so yeah, I just do, uh, nothing extraordinary. For a while, I tried things like meditating after work or praying, or I tried all the things that like you would picture a monk doing. Um, it all felt like work to me. It felt like I worked 12 hours, now I got to come home and pray, you know.
Yeah.
That wasn't helpful to me. So that's what I do. I also do try to get enough sleep. I do tangible things like I eat a fairly healthy diet. I'm a vegetarian. I try not to, I don't drink too much. I used to drink a lot more than I did, or than I do. Um, so I try not to do destructive things. A lot of first responder type people and police officers, paramedics, all of them, they're eating terrible, terrible food or smoking or drinking, or um, it takes a real toll on you. So yeah, I just take time to step away, and I draw boundaries. When I'm not at work, I do not follow up with patients. I don't talk about work. I don't interact with work. I don't cover shifts that um, need to be covered. That's not my problem. Hire someone else. I have to draw a boundary to say I'm off the clock, in pastoral care, or I will be exhausted to the point where I have nothing to give anyone. That doesn't help anybody. So it took a while, though. My first 3 months were spent getting very little sleep, crying a lot, wondering what I was doing with my life, um, somewhat experiencing PTSD from particularly gory things that I had seen, dismemberments and things like that. They were very just visually arresting. Um, it was tough. It was really tough. And after a while, you can persevere, and the issue is compassion burnout. You don't ever want to get to compassion fatigue where I don't care and someone dying is just not a big deal, or like, some terrible thing is not. I don't ever want to harden in that way. I always want to be sensitive and receptive. Um, I don't want to downplay those things. So it's a balance of allowing yourself to feel terrible when you need to feel terrible, and then letting go of that. Because that is what is needed. Is if you don't let yourself feel terrible, you're not ever going to feel good. If you just try to hit a midline point where you just like are just smooth sailing all the time and try to hold it together, you don't allow yourself to grieve. And I have to grieve for people. Um, yeah, so hopefully that kind of addresses that question.
I was kind of just adding to your last couple of comments. I found that for whatever reason, that crying and laughing provide the same kind of relief to the body, the same kind of positive, you know, restoration to the body.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
just a very similar feeling.
Physiologically, what's going on is quite similar. So, yeah,
But I guess they're both equally important in equal measures. So
agreed. very much agreed.
I wonder if you have a philosophy that also helps you through it. For me, I believe everything happens for a reason, and I heard you say that ahead of time that you're not someone who believes in free will. You believe in determination, and I'm
Mhm.
wondering, is that something that kind of helps you make sense of all of this? But just a matter of keeping perspective.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see Josh's smile when I start to just briefly answer this, because this is one of these things he chuckles at, I think. Yes, I am a hard determinist. I deny free will. I do not believe, however, in fate or purpose or what's traditionally known as a teleological argument. I do not believe things happen for a reason. Um, just me personally, um, I think there was the birth of the universe, and since then it's been a causal chain of reactions from that first explosion. So that's bottom line, kind of how I think of determinism. That could be a whole different segment. It might be interesting sometime, Josh. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know about purpose. I obviously encounter patients who believe that, and that's something I don't challenge unless it's unhealthy. The only time I challenge someone's belief is if my assessment is that belief is unhealthy for them, or in other terms, if it's not life-giving. So, for example, if someone believes in hell, but that belief allows them to live a meaningful, purposeful, happy life, that's good. If they believe in hell, but they're gay and they're convinced they're going to hell, I'm going to ask questions to help them reason through whether the belief in hell is life-giving to them rather than restrictive. So, that being said, so people, many people I talk to, especially Christians, believe that everything happens for a reason, and that may work for them, and that's good if that's a healthy, functional belief. Far be it from me to challenge that, because who cares whether I believe in free will or they do, or doesn't matter in the end. What matters is how it functions in their life. My personal philosophy is that it's essentially um, undirected by will. It's the unfolding of reality. So I think of each moment being a bit like uh, a nascent bud of a flower. And as we move into the future, it unfolds, it unfurls, and reveals itself. I think that's what's going on through time, is the unfolding of reality, or unfolding of God's will, if you will, meaning just the creative movement forward movement of the universe. What that does for me is allows me to be okay with all things. It helps me not to be tribalistic or divisive in saying some things are sacred and some are profane. I don't believe, someone asked me the other day whether I thought they were a good person. And I said, I don't think of people in that way. I don't think there are good or bad people. I think they're just people. I don't think there are good or bad events. I think there are events that we like. There are events that cause suffering. There are some events that cause joy and peace. I can tell you which ones I prefer, obviously, but I don't label them good or bad, um, because that carries a judgment and implies that other people ought not to be doing what they're doing. And I don't want to be in that place, because it rubs up against my attempt to live within my vow of humility. So I try to approach things as gray. I try not to label black and white. Um, I try not to embrace any belief that is an us versus them, or the saved versus the unsaved, or the clean versus the wicked, or any of that. Yeah, I don't know if that addresses it, but I think because my overall philosophy is essentially somewhat absurdist, and I mean that in an existential kind of way, absurdist. Um, it allows me to to weather the ups and downs and take them as all part of just the amazing phenomenon of being conscious, of being a conscious being. I mean, some of the most terrible times I've been through in my life, I sometimes stand in awe and think, my God, how amazing is it that all these terrible things happened at once? I mean, that in itself is awesome. Truly, it's awesome. It was unpleasant, but let us not ignore the profound experiences we have that are unpleasant by labeling them bad. Instead, let's just witness them and appreciate them as best we can.
Well, we need to wrap up now, but I would really love it if you could end this. Also, I want to say this one is great as I thought it was, and I'm very happy you did this.
All right, good.
This is a great meeting, but I'd really like it if you could end this with maybe a prayer that you like or a prayer that you say while you're working, just whatever is significant to you to kind of cap this episode.
Certainly. Is everyone on the call okay if I pray? If not,
Yes.
say something in the chat. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll open with a brief prayer, and then I would like to read a prayer that maybe some people are familiar with that was written by Thomas Merton, who was a monk who ended up settling at the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. That is probably my favorite prayer and a prayer that I pray on a daily basis. Let me first open us in prayer. Eternal presence of all presence, eternal creator and being, essence of being. I first stand in awe and thanks and gratitude for being called here today to speak. I thank you for those who were willing to listen. I thank us for being able to step into discomfort and doubt and questioning and seeking. I give you thanks. Now I'll read the Thomas Merton prayer. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I'm following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore will I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Amen.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. Everyone
You're welcome.
tell him thank you for this extraordinary meeting for coming. I think you definitely got to come back.
Sure,
Agreed.
sure.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was very heartfelt.
I appreciate the opportunity. I thank you, Josh, for asking me here, and I really thank everyone for listening to whatever came out of my mouth over the past 2 hours. So God bless you for that. That's called long suffering, by the way, which is a virtue. So you've just bought yourself a few days out of hell or purgatory or however any of that works. Don't ask me.
Eh.
But thank you all, Josh. I'll talk to you later, and God bless you all.
Thank you. Thank you for
You're
being
welcome.
so genuine and authentic and humble, and for inspiring us. And this was fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. That was the realest conversation ever, and I really respect real conversations. So, thank you.
Mm.
I don't know if the word's enjoyment or what, but it was a wild ride, and I thank you for being here today.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Definitely gives a new appreciation of outlook on things. So that
Mm.
helps.
Yes, not all of us Southern Christian boys are waving rebel flags and trying to topple the government. So that's the other thing. The other thing to take from this is we're as different as any other population, right? So, mm.
Yeah. All right.